Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth is stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
So that was kind of, I think, the beginning of AI in sales, but it's moved right across the whole value chain now, where you're looking at pre-sales to post-service around the account intelligence, right? Like we have a partnership with IntroHive, you may have heard of them. They're another Canadian firm. And essentially their focus there is on the relationship mapping, right? Where you know the interconnections and the recency, which is very important, especially in a large company. We still have some challenges there because of the privacy dynamics of looking into emails. There's still quite a bit of sensitivity, certainly in Canada on that front, maybe less so in other, states or, countries. We're going to see this collision between as the customer have permission. I've given you permission to surface up those insights and those observations.
Mhm.
Even mining my emails and is it positive or negative? And by the way, forming a picture of me and my personality. Am I a, driver type? Am I, high affiliator? And so these sciences can be used in different ways. That's why I always say, don't get too trapped on AI. AI is a big, big bucket. Just get focused on what is your use case? What's the problem? And then step back and really decide, can you solve it in-house? Is it worth solving in-house? And more importantly, do you have the quality of data that's in-house to solve it?
Ciao, David. I'm just back in from Italy.
Oh, wow. Welcome back, Mark. I hope you had a great time. And isn't it wonderful that we're actually talking about vacations again? I can't believe it. It's fantastic.
It's super wonderful. We were so happy to travel over there, our first time in Italy. I'm wondering a little bit now why I came back. I can do this from anywhere. Why don't we just do that? I'll do it in Rome next time. I'll do it from Rome.
Yeah, it's funny. We do a lot of work with refrigeration, and you've had the coffee over there, the cappuccinos, and they just taste different. So the first thing I did when I got back, I called the engineer at one of the large milk companies in Canada, who's Italian. I said, "What's the secret? What's so much better?" And he goes, "I can't tell you that." So
exactly.
The difference. The food tastes amazing in Italy, doesn't it?
The food's amazing. The coffee's amazing. The people are amazing. The hustle, we really like the hustle and bustle of Rome and the scooters and the liberal traffic rules. We liked everything about it. So we'll be back for sure, but we just had a wonderful time. However, I am glad to be back. Really glad to talk about today's topic, artificial intelligence. How excited are you to talk to Cindy Gordon today?
I'm extremely excited to talk to Cindy. I mean, she's a world leader in this topic, and this is a growing topic. You don't have to look far. Look into the sports world. Those guys are measured in every single way, and it determines how much their contract's going to be and how much playing time they get. And we're going to see that more and more in the sales world. And, we have to get on board because this world is becoming more complex. Our sales cycle is becoming more complex. And having like a bionic arm or a little piece of AI in your back pocket, like a robotic friend that's going to be able to tell you some things to help set you up or look at something a little bit more critically from a different perspective, that's the future. And Cindy is on top of that. So we have a real treat today, Mark, for sure.
We really do. And so Dr. Cindy Gordon, she's actually the CEO and the founder of Sales Choice, an AI SaaS company focused on ending revenue uncertainty and bringing more humanity to sales. How about that? She's been a senior executive with Accenture and Xerox and Citicorp. She's a board advisor to the Forbes School of Business and Technology. She's written 14 books. The latest is called The AI Dilemma. So I've actually known, coincidentally, Cindy's in the same city you and I are in. So of all the folks we interview all over the world, Cindy's in Toronto. We're in Toronto. I'm surprised it's taken us this long to get Cindy on the show, but I'm so thrilled that she's on the show here today. And boy, I've got my pen and paper in front of me here. I'm going to be, I'm ready to learn. Let's put it that way. Shall we get started here today, David?
Absolutely. Let's do this, Mark. I can't wait.
Hey, Cindy, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be here, Mark.
So as always, I'm joined by my partner in crime, David Fauser.
Hey, David.
He's got a great reference point. He runs a sales organization of about 150 people. And one of the things I was so interested about today, and why I'm so glad David's joining us, Cindy, is given your area of expertise with AI, data matters, quantum computing matters, but sales organizations that have a lot of data, I think have a lot of opportunity to benefit, and we're going to learn more from you today. But I'm so thrilled David's joining us here today. But one of the first questions we always like to ask, Cindy, is maybe give us the short history of your journey in professional sales.
Well, I was born once upon a time. I'll try and be as clear and succinct as I can. Most of my early sales training came from Xerox.
Great.
Where I had the opportunity to work through a number of roles up to then senior director and ran a fairly significant P&L. So I've kind of had boots on the ground, so to speak, in appreciating the cadence of sales, the interconnections between customer service, product management, obviously financial management and legal, which is always key to drive the contracts and ensure you're focused on that beat. So a lot of my early training was there. And then when I was a partner at Accenture, which I later after Xerox, I was overseeing a lot of complex CRM initiatives because at that point, pre-sales if you think about post-service, they weren't always connected in terms of integration points, right, across the data sets. I've always had one foot in sales, but another deep foot in technology. So years ago, and I won't go back how far I had learned how to program. And so in any role that I had, I was always bridging strategy, business, technology, process, and mainly large scale transformation. And then, when I was a venture capitalist, I had the opportunity to listen to all the CEOs pitch, understand their tech, but also look at their go-to-market and whether or not I felt that they had the, as they would say, the substance to drive an outcome, because it's very easy to get enamored with technology, right?
Well, what a great background. And there's countless folks, senior thought leaders in professional sales that have been on this show, The Selling Well. And the number of them that are at a certain level of maturity that got their training at either Xerox, IBM, Motorola, there was a period of time there in the late 80s, very early 90s, where that was really sales school. And you'd get your ticket stamps by going through that process. And those people went on to be the sales leaders and thought leaders in sales for North America for an entire generation, really. So great background and training there. But today's topic, artificial intelligence, AI, and whether it's, whether you call it AI, whether it's data, machine learning, predictive data analytics, I think there's lots of different names out there, but it's kind of an exciting conversation for David and I today with you, because We're always trying to add a little bit of science to the art of selling, but maybe as a starting point, and I know you're extremely deep here, Cindy, let's define AI. So we're all on the same page for the listeners. What are we talking about when we talk about this area or this discipline? And then we're kind of excited to talk about how we can leverage this to improve sales performance.
Delighted to do so. Well, I think the first thing is you really need to simplify language, right? Because one of the dynamics we have right now in sales leadership is not having the depth and training in some of the conversations that we're having, right? So if I took, five CROs or VPs of sales and put them in the room and I asked them to define AI versus machine learning versus an algorithm versus defining, I'd probably get different answers. And
Right.
people are at different experimentation levels. So the very basics is AI is not necessarily new, to be very clear, right? It goes back to the 1950s. So it's always been around the passion to mimic the human brain in a very simple, simple term that salespeople can quickly get their heads around. Now, in the field of AI, there's probably now, in terms of methodologies and toolkits, we're talking about hundreds and maybe thousands right now, right? In a lot of areas. So it's really important to understand the most important thing is what is the problem that you're trying to solve.
Hmm.
And I see so often that's where sales executives can ask the questions because they're used to solutioning. At least the good ones are, right? So what are we trying to achieve? So what we've learned is that we all know that 30% of the market Salesforce has, and then Microsoft Dynamics has another 20% of the market. And then you've got the NetSuite, and then you've got all the other players, and they all have a sliver, right? And of course, we can't forget SAP, although they're not as significant in maybe some of the CRM constructs. Um, from what I've seen is that people started off in sales putting a lot of AI attention to lead sourcing, right? Because trying to find
Right.
the best qualified opportunities, and so we've seen a whole wonderful generation of technology there. And obviously, Salesforce, of course, has a value proposition there as a lot of other players. Um, but again, if you can spend a lot of time surfacing up by seeing, like absorbing the daily the World Wide Web, which is a lot of what these softwares will do, right? Then they'll have an algorithm that will pick up, when did Cindy type in let's say fridges. I think David, you mentioned fridges earlier. And so that becomes a cue that maybe this person's in this propensity to purchase kind of threshold.
Right.
Well, who knows? Maybe I accidentally went to that site. So you surface up those possibilities. So the assumption there is you're getting better insight. And that might give you a signal for a potential conversion window. Um, so that lead side is pretty mature as a market with lots of AI enablement. So that was kind of, I think, the beginning of AI in sales. But it's moved right across the whole value chain now, where you're looking at pre-sales to post-service around the account intelligence, right? Like we have a partnership with IntroHive. You may have heard of them. They're another Canadian firm. And essentially their focus there is on the relationship mapping, right? Where the interconnections and the recency, which is very important, especially in a large company. We still have some challenges there because of the privacy dynamics of looking into emails. There's still quite a bit of sensitivity, certainly in Canada on that front, maybe less so in other, states or, countries. We're going to see this collision between as the customer to have permission. I've given you permission to surface up those insights and those observations.
Hmm.
Even mining my emails and is it positive or negative? And by the way, forming a picture of me and my personality. Am I a, driver type? Am I, high affiliator? And so these sciences can be used in different ways. That's why I always say, don't get too trapped on AI. AI is a big, big bucket. Just get focused on what is your use case, what's the problem, and then step back and really decide, can you solve it in house? Is it worth solving in house? And more importantly, do you have the quality of data that's in house to solve it? And so I find that we need more knowledge of kind of that validation piece to play out. But happy to talk about, more specific of what we do. But that's kind of like what I see in the broader landscape.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd love to unpack a few of those things. And just for everybody listening, on the front end, surprisingly, Cindy, not a lot of people are even leveraging the front end on lead generation for whatever you want to call it, leveraging technology to understand folks with a propensity to buy. And so for folks out there, these are things like the intent data you might get from Zoom Info, where maybe the easiest example of it is if you're a smaller organization that competes with a larger one, the intent data folks are going to go out, find out which companies are doing screen scraping or searching on topics, white papers, anything associated with a competitor. And if they are, they could actually flag those organizations for you through intent data. You can set it up. So it's an easy thing. If I'm a small player, we do sales training. Maybe I want to know which companies are doing investigation on a very large company for sales training like Sandler. Those people won't tell me the person, but it'll give me the company. And so now I can think, well, if I'm going to do demand generation, I might target those types of companies first because they may have more of a propensity to be in the market for what we do, perhaps.
I'm
So,
glad you mentioned that, Mark, and I'm going to do a build. There's another company called LeadSift that we use, and they tell you not just the company, they tell you the name of the person and the email.
wow, lead
So
sift, lead
Lead,
sift.
LeadSift was acquired recently by IDG, and we've analyzed probably about 30 of these players, and they're excellent. I was surprised that Salesforce didn't buy them. They were out of the Maritimes.
Oh,
Brilliant,
cool.
brilliant. But you can now get the exact search words, the number of times, but the email and the individual. So, but even then, the conversion rates, even getting to that point, are still not where you would hope they could be.
Hmm.
So, but I think it always goes back to execution, and really being clear strategically and what is really your coverage. Really do that thinking first. And then to your point, you can point things in the right direction. But the nice thing now, you can get the drill down. And then there's another company that we're experimenting with, and I should tell you what we do at some point, but reply.io, where essentially all of my emails are pre-structured, but they also go into my LinkedIn, which is pretty massive. And then they can interconnect and also update Salesforce, and also keep track of everything. So it's pretty powerful. So like in other email routing systems, we would put in the structure, especially on the demand gen side. But now, being able to play out into LinkedIn and back into Salesforce, and also sync with my emails and keep track if there's a change. So things are, I guess my point is, it's getting more and more sophisticated, and I look forward to the day I can just say, out of all of these pathways, which one is the best, the highest odds, because all of those transactions, and my computer just creates the email and off it goes. But we are heading very rapidly into some of those enablements, for sure.
Well, and Cindy, you on your website and with what you've done, there's 14 great books. We're going to talk about some of those as part of today. But there is a great book for everybody out there, and we've had both these folks on the podcast. Tech Powered Sales does kind of a nice job of trying to help navigate, and thankfully they don't go into all 5,000 different sales enablement technologies out there because it's completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
But what they do is talk about the different categories quite well, and they give us kind of the top 10 or top 20. And they have a nice way of approaching this topic exactly the way you did, which is to say technology can help. But at this end of the day, I've got to be able to have a coherent conversation about the desired outcomes of my client, not my desired outcomes, and be able to add value in every interaction.
Very
So,
true.
there'll never be that day where this can be done without my human interaction to humanize the process. But it's a great kind of guide to trying to navigate these technologies, particularly if some of these mid-sized companies aren't doing these things today. David, one of the things Cindy mentioned was, a lot of this depends on the data. And, do you have good data? Hey, what's the problem statement you're trying to solve for? And Cindy, I think it's always the same with our organizations. We want more sales. We want to increase win rates.
for
We
sure.
want to focus our resources on the smaller number of deals that actually have a propensity to close. We want a sales organization that is constantly improving. So we'd love to use machine learning, data analytics to improve the performance of the team so everybody evolves. But David, given your organization, you're in kind of a unique situation, given the history and the size and the data. What have you done in this space up to now?
Well, I think I've done some pretty basic things, Mark. Like I think that we've developed some deal scoring, and we've developed some, using some analytics that are more than just what the rep fills in on the CRM. We're using some win rate ratios and et cetera to try to drive a percentage that we're going to win the job, so we can really have that conversation and make sure the deals qualify before we put a lot of time and money into it. The deals that we work on for our cost about $10,000 a week, and they're pretty it's an engineered solution, so there's a lot of work that goes into it. So if we start quoting everything with that same intensity, it's not very cost efficient.
Yeah.
One of the problems that I see, Cindy, that I'd love to ask a question on is like, our problems change all the time, and the technology changes all the time. And boy, is it ever hard to put together a technology plan sometimes of where you're going to go to and what you should be focusing on, because the world, I find, is so dynamic and complicated at the moment that it's pretty difficult to focus on where to go. What sort of advice would you have for people like me in my situation in that regards?
Well, I think what I always try and do is understand, what your current technology environment is and how distributed your data is, because that's really important. Like if I don't know if you're on Salesforce or you're on Dynamics or HubSpot, like what do you want? And then I can be probably much more specific, David.
Oh, I'm on Zoho.
Zoho, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that means that you've got a player that's definitely been in the market for a long time. They've been evolving, but they are targeting for more of a mid-market solution, right? So I always say if you're trying to be a big enterprise company one day, you may start with foundations that are Microsoft or Salesforce because they own most of the market. So that just means that the amount of R&D that's going into engineering and the connector layers, right, really hard to keep up. That being said, I haven't looked at Zoho in a while, but I do find that, I know the Salesforce ecosystem the best. Mainly because our software overrides on top of Salesforce, right? And so we bring an AI layer on top of data that we can see through that environment. But I would have to probably dive in more with you in the sense of, the different technologies that integrate. What I always say to people is look at the number of connectors.
Okay.
To your point, like, so get Zoho to give you the list of all the software connectors. They can give you a list. Then you can get a list from Salesforce. You can just see what, how fast, maturing are these players that you're dealing with. Because all the vendors that are the innovators, they have to make their choices of where they're going to integrate into an API layer and with their product roadmap, right?
Mhm.
So usually people will pick the bigger pathways or bigger cow paths, kind of logical, like channel playing, right? Yeah, it is difficult. But to me, I always say, try and really think strategically over the long term, and then don't. I always wonder why people switch from Salesforce to Microsoft and then back, and you never need to do that. A database is a database. These vendors are so on par in so many fronts, right? Yeah, longer conversation.
You want to know why they change?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. They change because the new CRO comes in, is more familiar with one platform or another.
Yeah, it probably is true.
That's why they change. And it makes no sense at all. And it's expensive, but it's somebody at senior levels more familiar.
It's also very disruptive, Mark, when you do something like that. Extremely.
Absolutely. Now we're taking learning cycles from the sales organization on the wrong thing. We want them to evolve what they do, their mindset, skill set, and to a certain extent, their activity tool set. And instead, they're getting caught up in learning a new technology that does fundamentally the same thing. But Cindy, if we move away from technology for a second and just go for those of us, let's say, that are at a starting point that haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about this up to this point, which would be actually the vast majority of organizations out there, what are the top use cases? Let's get away from lead generation,
Sure.
because you started talking about some other excellent organizations,
Sure.
relationship management, persona mapping, and so forth. What are these top use cases where we think we could use, there's the intelligent use of data to help us sell better?
For sure. So there's different use cases for different sizes of companies, right?
Mhm.
So if you're an SMB, likely the lead generation side of the equation is going to bring the most value because you won't have enough depth inside your CRM that AI applications can overlay. So you're thinking more external enablement, right?
Right.
The top probably five use cases that are in the mid market and also I think the large enterprise. Number one would be predictive sales forecasting and opportunity scoring, where you basically mine through all the patterns on the historical wins and you basically surface up the best pathways. So companies like ourselves do that. Clary does that. Aviso, we're probably one of the top three players in this segment. So that piece of the puzzle is maturing nicely, and obviously Salesforce, of course. The innovators get out there, and then Salesforce comes along, and but everybody's doing things a little bit differently. The other big use cases would definitely be on account scoring. So think
Mm.
about so you start off with the lead scoring and the opportunity scoring, and then you can move to the forecasting enablement. Then you can move to the account intelligence scoring, which basically starts to wrap around all the patterns with the account. So if you took intro, high plus sales choice, you basically have got a very powerful integrated solution, and that's why we did that alliance with them earlier this year. If you move along, obviously there's a lot going on the customer service side, bas-
Mm.
basically on the sentiment mining, right, where you can do the pattern detection on the call center interactions, and you can mine, and obviously intelligent chatbots have been having a lot of fun. So those I think would be some of the top use cases in sales. Not all salespeople have the customer service operations under them. Some do, which I think is
Mhm.
smart. I think the smart organizations are collapsing marketing, sales, and customer service under one senior VP because the data flows are, end to end in the pipes. And if you don't, you get, I'd like to use this tool. And you need to really keep an integrated vision here going. Otherwise, you'll make a lot of strategic mistakes. And you see accounts that have different platforms, and if they just looked at data as an asset and thought end to end, they'd probably be much further along than maybe they are.
Well, it seems a lot of things that you've just talked about at the SMB level, a lot of this stuff ends up being in the head of the CEO, who's been somebody who's actually lived through most of the big deals or significant things that have taken place with the business. And we get an opportunity to work with some of those folks. Think a tech company that has less than 50 salespeople or a sales organization smaller than 50. It's amazing to me what that CEO can actually remember and say, well, this looks exactly like this, and so on and so forth. But let's talk about practically something like account scoring. What happens there for the mid or large enterprise? What's actually taking place outside of the technology? You talked about simplifying things at the beginning. What are we doing and how does it help?
Sure. Well, the nice thing with AI is you can actually go through all the historical data and you can see all the patterns within your accounts. And
Hmm.
so you can start to say, this is gold, this is silver, this is bronze. And you can start classifying things without, all your analytical people. It will figure out that call it that broader map. And then it's really about what other additional data sets you want to integrate because AI loves data, right? The more you feed it, the more data from different sides, you will start to expand, right? So, the activity side of accounts and then so the email interactions, you can obviously flow up into the accounts and kind of see what the correlation is of the account activity and the drips. In other words, what's the length of time in that all those conversations. The other thing I think that's really a powerful in account intelligence is, especially in everybody knows somebody, and often we don't know who knows somebody, right? And so when you start being able to surface up that Mark or David, you actually know because your uncle is, the CEO of this or the board, that science can figure that out. And so you can start showing I call it connections that could be tapped from a relationship capital point of view that aren't being tapped.
Hmm.
Individuals are in the warehouse or, it's so, account intelligence is not just the interactions and what the drip is, but also I think it starts to define your coverage. And then through the accounts, you can then see out of all the opportunities, what are the A's, the B's, and the C's. And we go into that kind of classification. So, and that's really powerful because if I have, 30 sales cycles going in one account, because I've got a lot of different solutions, especially in large enterprise accounts, I can start to really look at my odds and where I might want to really bulk up my resourcing. Uh,
Mm.
and what we find is that the science sometimes is we're running in some cases at 90% accurate on large data sets. Another one company, we're at 98%. Another one, at the beginning of the cycle, we're going to say whether you're going to win or lose, and we're right that amount of time. So what happens is that
Wow.
the account coverage and the scoring can start to shift. The issue, of course, is salespeople still are learning to trust what the signals are,
Hmm.
right? And so there's a lot of discussion we could have on what we have to do to equip our sales leaders to understand, because the science is pretty clear. It's getting the humans to take action.
Well, Daniel Kahneman will say we've got 135 cognitive biases that are almost impossible to break. And you listen to that and go, well, that's not me. Until you read his third chapter, you realize you've already identified 7 biases. I absolutely have. And then I'm locked into. It's just amazing the things I'd be in that boat. Cindy, I'll be honest with you, you'd start to say, well, do I trust the data or do I trust my gut and my experience having done this for 20 years and my sales training background's no different than yours? For sure, I'm going to default to my personal bias until I'm proven wrong a couple of times where I'm going to go, boy, I think I need some help, or at least we should consider the alternatives. So it feels like it's in some cases early days for some of this work, which is always where that opportunity lies, like to differentiate what you do versus a competitor.
Yeah, what we've started to learn is the science is there. The data we surface up if it's complete or not. So we have very powerful visualization. So you can get out of that racket that we don't have good enough data because that's the first sniff test, right? You either got a good enough data and a good enough predictive baseline, or you don't. You stop, right?
Mhm.
The piece of the puzzle is changing some of the sales dialogue processes. So when you sit and have your one-on-one, you need to bring your toolkits to bear, right? So much of the work is needed in altering the sales process, communication, interactions, and getting to your point, the pessimism up to the optimism. But there's no question in my mind that the predictions that B2B sales will be controlled by more chatbots and robots is really going to happen. Because if you have the science and then you have the voice overlays, right, and the emotional detection, I don't know if I'll see it all in my lifetime, but it's heading in that direction. But what these tools are not good at is the eye to eye contact and the affiliation and the affirmation and the love and so creating that emotional intensity is not yet where the technology is, although they're working on it. A lot
Mm.
of people are working on emotion augmentation, right? So they can see if Cindy's happy, and then Sophia will alter her voice and maybe go down an octave, or be able to empathize, maybe even cry, right? So it's a
That would
really
be David, Cindy, by the way. The tears would come from David, just so you know, of the two of us, but I get the point. I get the point.
yeah.
So, and sorry to interrupt, I couldn't resist that one, but it really feel, you said your lifetime, and I'm sure I'm quite a bit older than you are. I'll be honest with you, based on what we're reading these days, things like Peter Diamandis, this one happens to be lying around, the future is faster than you think. He's a futurist, talking about, because of the convergence of various different technologies, there's this explosion. Ray Kurzweil from Google originally is also part of this whole process. It's amazing, between big data and quantum computing and a few other things, the speed with which these things change and evolve, it's absolutely staggering. And to me, everything you're saying just inherently makes sense. Why wouldn't I want to look at the science of what the data tells me? One of us on this call is part of a company that's been around over 100 years and, has 150 salespeople and, thousands and thousands of clients. You got to believe, even if there's some required data cleansing, there's an enormous amount of knowledge in that data that's hard to extract and act upon, but boy, it could be extremely helpful. One question, by the way, most of what we talked about here, we talked about, lead scoring, opportunity forecasting, account scoring, and then the customer service component of things. Is there a little bit of this actually in terms of pure sales execution? So, with companies, again, we have no affiliation, but folks like Gong or whomever else listening to conversations, doing some of that sentiment analysis, giving real-time coaching. Is that a space that you're seeing a lot of activity in today as well?
Yes, the coaching, especially through analyzing Zoom calls, which is pretty popular now in terms of sales, where you're looking at the customer and then you're rating, is the customer engaged or not, the number of questions that you asked versus the customer. And obviously a good conversation has balance, right? Like what I know that you're trying to do here, right? So I
Right.
think those coaching tools are very powerful, and obviously technology analytics can be very good at that. It also can create some false positives, though, too, right?
Sure.
And so, I can be smiling a lot, but in my head, I'm thinking something else. So there's also research to, and that's where sometimes these algorithms, they only see what they can see, right? So that's where the humans have to come in and say, okay, was this a consistent behavior that you've seen when you've actually been with that person? Or the question is, have you really been with that person? We do have a generation of people now that are being trained to behave and act a certain way on these calls,
Hmm.
right? But so executives are being trained to, not pick up their phones because you're on candid camera,
Right.
right? So, it's like with anything, really have a clear vision, but also always keep the thoughtfulness and on what could go wrong or what might not be right. And I always say a little dose of skepticism is a wise thing. I think the fundamental issue, though, going back to your earlier point, is what's missing is the digital literacy and analytics skill development of sales professionals. Most sales reps, in their onboarding process or even their interview process, they don't have to do any tests usually on statistics.
Ah,
And there's a big difference. When you think about it, AI is really, it's a large statistical computational infrastructure, right? And there's different tools. But at the end of the day, it's stats that are coming into, different frames, right? And if you don't know what a correlation is, or you don't know what a histogram is, or you don't know what a median is, or a mode, all these terms, and know that you can get lost. And I know the same thing is true for boards of directors. So, and the same thing off CEOs. Like I think the CEO at Canadian Tire did a very wise thing. Rex Lee's the CIO over there, and they took all their executives off and trained them on analytics and statistical literacy. So my point is, you really, it's like we had to evolve, right? Like earlier, we were product selling, right?
mhm.
Right. You're focused on function and feature, and you recognize that was transactional. And then obviously relationship selling, and then challenger selling, and try and bring more to the table than you were asked to bring to the table. So that means more creative problem solving skills, right? And increased listening skills. And now with AI underpinning everything, you've got a whole other set of skills on AI ethics and data, right? And the language of that world. So it's the digital literacy side. I did a session with Dr. Karen Piesker out of University of Ryerson. If you know Karen, she's got the sales school there.
Oh, I don't know.
Brilliant leader. And we had a very deep conversation. A lot of her research is on, she'd be good to have on your show, was all on
Thank you.
sales digital literacy, which I totally see all the time.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned some of those. They're older now. You mentioned something like the Challenger sale, and that book's about 10 to 11 years old as of right now. I think they just had their 10th year anniversary. And we had Matt Dixon on the show. It'll actually air 2 weeks before this episode. And his latest book is called The Jolt Effect, also a great book. But the way they did the research on the Jolt Effect was they analyzed 2 million Zoom sales calls, leveraging AI. And they were analyzing, and I'll just get a bit of a footnote that I could have this wrong, but I believe they analyzed 80,000 different data points. But of course, in this world, the last time there was research done on 2 million different sales interactions was about 1987 when Spin Selling came out originally.
I've got that book right up there. I know.
Do you?
Yeah. For sure. The Xerox, we trained everybody on spin selling. I think we were actually one of the masters of writing that.
Yeah, so they say that the research alone back then would have cost somewhere between $2 and $3 million.
Yeah.
And so up until 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the thought was no one's ever going to invest in that amount of sales research. That's why every sales book has a sample size of 300 executives instead of 3 million.
I'll have to pick that up, Mark.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that. The other person, just that has the best research on AI, apps, and sales is Jim Dickey.
Oh, nice.
So, if you don't know Jim, I know Jim, but all the use cases for AI and sales and all of the vendors that he thinks are worth looking at, and obviously we're in there, which I'm happy to see consistently. But you can see the evolution of the industry in a really nice report, and with his roots, I think it was Insights, no, not Inside Sales, but his prior firm that was acquired by Miller Hyman. I know it's just escaping me, but anyways, CSO Insights.
Right.
Right. So, but again, that's his whole focus is him and his partner are, really deeply analyzing AI in sales use cases with rigor.
Well, Cindy, that's a great lead. And by the way, thanks for those tips of other folks to come on the show. But this discussion has been really amazing. I think, we have this little podcast, The Selling Well, because we're trying to help people improve the performance and professionalism of B2B sales immediately. And even just us getting into the introduction of this topic for many of our listeners, I think is going to be really helpful. But clearly, they're going to want to know more about you. And so tell us a little bit about how somebody listening is going to learn a little more about Cindy Gordon, Dr. Cindy Gordon, and Sales Choice.
Well, I'll maybe focus on Sales Choice first. It's pretty easy to see me. I've got a pretty prolific profile out there. Been blessed with lots of good opportunities and great networks. Sales Choice is a very focused firm on AI sales analytics. And as I mentioned, we've overlaid on top of Salesforce, and we predict usually at 85% accuracy on outcomes, only for mid to large enterprises. So my doctorate was in complexity science. So I'll say a little bit about me and growth. So I'm very focused on where are we now business-wise? Where do we want to go? What is the gap? And how are we going to get there? And can AI and data help you, drive a different trajectory? Like some of us here, I've seen so many different approaches. I've kind of learned what works and what doesn't work. But it always starts with the clarity of the leader and how they cascade So I'm a big believer in leadership and transparency. So that's why we built our software to only be white box AI. Most of the vendors, a lot of the vendors are black box. They will do a prediction, but you do not know how they derive the prediction. So our firm, you know exactly what's in the model, function, feature, and you are educated in the journey because you need to own it. Plus, also legally, you should own it,
Mm.
right? So it's another, I do expect the laws will change here in terms of data auditing of AI models and ensuring there's not data drift or data bias. Um, in terms of the company, our largest account would be Purolator,
Mm.
running all of their small, mid, large enterprises. They've been a wonderful account. And what's been interesting to see the evolution and thinking of the different AI use cases that they're doing. We've moved into a new area that, it might be worth another session, but it's all around happiness. During COVID, my inspiration was why are we all know that customers buy from happier people? Matter of fact, 98% of customers buy from happier, positive people that they feel some affiliation with. So why do we have 360-degree employee surveys that are once a year, and by the time we do them, right, too late for the people that want to turn over? So we've built a real-time, everyday check-in. How are you feeling based on a lot of research? And so my thesis, and we're just moving it out. We work with the Minister of Innovation and Minister of Transportation to secure the grant, and Purolator's obviously in the deployment. But I do want to prove out that happier people have increased win rates, and I think technically we can solve that problem. And it'll be an interesting area as you look at some of these stats. 20 to 30% of the global population wake up in the morning either sad or angry.
20%?
20 to 30%.
Wow.
And so huge implications. And so there's a whole movement now on happiness economics, which I'm very involved in and writing about on Forbes as well. So the research is out there. It's like with everything. The researchers get way out there on the Gallup, the statistics, and then you see there's lots of software that do mindfulness, but they're at the business to consumer level. They haven't, or if they go into corporate level, it's not a daily, just imagine if I woke up in the morning on my corporate screen and the first thing I have to type in is, the screen comes up and it's, how are you feeling? The very first question. Well, what's the most important thing? It's ensuring your people are happy, motivated, that they're feeling supported, they're feeling nurtured, they're feeling that you've got their back. And so I think we're going to see a whole new generation of applications that are more humanistic. I really do. I think the colors are going to change. I think, with what the kids like to see, it's going to feel like an animated candy world. And I'm excited about that because the designers are starting to really challenge, the grays and the whites and the dull blues. And so it's going to be a really interesting time to see how all of this new tapestry comes together.
Boy, for 25 years, without the science that you bring behind it, I've interviewed people for optimism. It's one of the 5 attributes of everything that you're looking for. It's one of the top 5 attributes I look for in anybody we work with in any role.
Very true.
So I would absolutely, I love this idea of happiness. And it's what an interesting take on it, happiness economics. And we always believe this intuitively, but if there's a business case behind this is how you get people to listen.
I'm counting on that, Mark. I've written a lot on Forbes. I'm working on a new book on this as well. So it's an interesting space, and it's time, right? We owe it to our kids. We owe it to our children. Their children, I think.
Well, Cindy, I don't know how many cappuccinos we have to buy you, but we're going to try and bring you back for that conversation.
I'd love to show you the software, and if you ever do that or have an offline, but it is an interesting use case.
Yeah. Well, I got to call it out. I'm just so super happy we had a chance to meet you today.
Thank you.
I think this conversation has brought sort of a different angle, different topic, to our listeners. And again, it's down this path of adding a little bit of science to the art of selling, which we all want to do to actually drive better results. It's been just an amazing pleasure speaking with you, Cindy. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Been a pleasure, Mark and David, and really look forward to having other pathways into discovery with both of you. And to thank you for allowing me to participate in your program. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Fauser, as always, thank you for joining. And
I didn't speak too much today, but I think I was stuck in thought, Mark, because as Cindy was talking, I guess kept on thinking about what she was saying. It's like, yeah, that's my problem. That's what I need to do. So anyways, really, really great conversation, Cindy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, David, if you ever just want to bounce off ideas graciously, I don't know a lot about Zoho. I looked at it earlier. And, we've got in our mid-market, because right now our API integrations are with Salesforce, NetSuite, Microsoft's the next one, obviously, right? I think that kind of gives you a cue that the innovators are having to prioritize their API connections, right? And they may never go down to the Zoho level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the software may not have the API integrations, right? That's just, I don't know enough.
Well, that's a dangerous offer because I will definitely take you up on it.
No.
You'll probably shoot me away eventually. Get out of here. But thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. And Mark, I'm off to Africa next week, back for a couple of weeks.
wow.
But happy to talk in November. Appreciate learning more about your business. Obviously, we're both in the sales arena. I didn't know you were in Toronto. I didn't even know what you did. So I'm honored to meet another colleague and a peer in the industry.
Well, we'll absolutely circle back, Cindy, and thank you for that. And team, I'd also like to thank all of the listeners here today. So as you know, we do this because we are trying to improve the performance and professionalism of B2B sales. And we're hoping we can have a conversation for an hour where you're going to learn or glean something that you can apply to you and your business and your industry immediately. So thank you for listening to this. If you like today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. Tell your friends. And if there's something we could have done in this podcast to make it even more valuable to you, we love constructive criticism. Please reach out to me, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. I check that email personally, and let me know what we can do to improve. And so thank you again for listening. Cindy, we will absolutely connect offline, and good selling to everybody in the meantime. Hey, David, you and I are always on this journey of trying to continue to learn. Did we learn anything today, do you think?
Yeah, I think I learned, Mark, that we really are living in a changing time, and we've got to be open to that, like have an open mind, because I think the thing is the world's going to change whether we want to change with it or not. And this whole thing of data analytics to really, I almost see it as like a bionic arm, on an athlete or something, and they could jump higher or throw the football farther. And that's why I see analytics really just turbo boosting the companies that dive in. And quite frankly, Mark, I can't wait to dive in, like to really gain those benefits. That's what I learned. What about you?
More of the same. There's no question. I'm going to be following up with Cindy offline to just get, I love the idea of these use cases and understanding at a little bit of a better level. What can we be doing today? And then also understanding what size of company do we need to be to take advantage of these things? So, in the funnel with our perhaps less than 8 or 9 paychecks every month, we may not have enough data where this can actually really add value. But certainly organizations like yours, you're managing 150 salespeople, you've got the kind of data that something can be done with it. There are insights to be gleaned.
I do think so. And the complicated is, where do you get started, and is it good enough? Like, that's my problem when I'm looking at our data and I'm looking at it from an analytical perspective. Am I biased? Is the data good enough? If I buy into this, will it lead us down the right path? With some of our deal scoring, sometimes we see these deal scores that are down near the bottom, like a 10% chance we're going to win. But I always remember that time I won that job at 10%. Right?
You remember that one data point. And the facts say 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, it doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
you're still telling the tale over 3 beers of the one time it did happen.
That's right. So, I mean, so when she said in that interview about, there's the data in front of you, the answer rationally, even emotionally, yet there's something that holds you back saying, we still have a chance here. Let's go for
Right.
it. And that's the, I don't know how we're going to overcome that one, but we will in time, I think, as you trust it a bit more.
Yeah. I think also the idea is we got to get started. So, as you know, we're not fans of every new sales enablement technology that comes out there. There's 5,000 different platforms. We are completely paralyzed by the paradox of choice. But to me, there's certain industries that leverage data effectively, like Netflix. How does Netflix know exactly what I want to watch all the time?
Mhm.
And they're right like 80% of the time. They know more than I do what I want to watch next.
Mhm.
And so when you look at an industry like that, and then we look at something like the professional sales industry or the specific industries that we support, you say there's got to be an opportunity to get better at this. And the first thing is perhaps start simply, but get out of the gate, because then your organization is going to start to learn and get better. And that can end up providing a little bit of a competitive advantage over your competitors. And so if we sell better, that in itself can become the competitive advantage. And it doesn't have to be 50% better. If we sell 15% better, we still win. So I think there's some great, it's a very exciting space in my opinion, and lots more work to do. And we'll bring Cindy back and talk about happiness economics.
Mhm.
I love that topic for sure.
Well, the other thing too, Mark, from this conversation before we go, I mean, the other thing that the takeaway I have is, us as a sales profession do need to look outside of our, sort of our box, the
Yeah.
sales, et cetera, because I think like, as she was like discussing some of her other things that she's researching, like happiness, she said digital training or analytics training, and she was rhyming off these things. I'm like, I don't know what one of those things are. I need some training, right? So as salespeople, we have to also be open-minded, because there's all this stuff happening out there. And yeah, it's going to be interesting as we see this evolve, Mark, for sure. So thank you so much for inviting me today. It was a great experience.
Thank you for joining. Really was a great experience, and we'll see you next time, sir.